Sefer Yehoshua, Parak Pasuk Ches. This is going to be part 7, I think, on this. I'm going to talk about learning by toiling today. Amelus B'Torah. Yaakov Galinsky, in his Sefer V'Yigadata and Parshas Ba'aloischa, Ches Chav Dalet, related that once he visited London and spoke with Rav Friedman, Rosh Hashiva in the city. And he said that one of his students was a boy who had a hard time understanding. As the Mishnah puts it, Pirkei Avos, Parakeh, he was slow to understand and quick to forget. He would sit there, he would try to understand what he was learning, but it just didn't work. If it was another student, the Rosh Yeshiva would have recommended that he find another yeshiva. But this boy, he was among one of the his father was one of the distinguished members of the community. If he demanded that they put a dowel in front of a stender, they would acquiesce. Still, he had to do the right thing. He called the father down to the yeshiva, showed him the Gemara statement that says that if a student didn't see progress in his studies after 5 years, he will never see it. And such a phenomenon did indeed exist. The Rosh Yeshiva informed the father, and his son was an example of this. So he needed to decide what to do about it. He said, father said, look, I'm not a mechanech, I'm not an educator. You decide. So Rosh Yeshiva said, fine, I'm prepared to fly with the boy to Israel to consult with the stipler. He said, no problem. I'll cover the expenses for the plane and tickets and everything that you need, the plane tickets and everything. A few days later, the Rosh Yeshiva and the student flew together to Israel. They went to daven to the Koisel Maravi, the Western Wall, Wailing Wall, before heading to Bnei Brak to see the stipler. Rosh Yeshiva explains the situation in the Kvittel, which is the small note that you give, that he was learning Gemara for more than 5 years. He didn't make any progress in his learning. He didn't participate in the shiurim, and he wasn't really learning so well with his friends. Maybe it would be better if he left the yeshiva and went to work. The stipler read it. He read it again while the visitors stood before him and their hearts were pounding. Finally, he put it down, the kvittel, and he turned to the bachur with a sweet smile and said, "You're learning yeshiva? Yes. What are you learning? Gemara? No. He didn't understand Gemara. Mishnah? No, he didn't understand Mishnah." Stipler was still smiling. He said, "So what do you learn?" He said, "Halacha kitzur shulchan aruch, the Chayei Adam." And that you understand? Yes. Not all of it, but if he didn't understand something in the halacha, he would ask questions. Okay. He reviewed the material many times, so he would remember it. He also liked to make charts to organize information. It was a shame he didn't bring them. The stiplers started smiling. He turned to Rabbi Friedman and said, "You're the Rosh Yeshiva?" "Yes. I wish you success, because if I had been the Rosh Yeshiva and you had been a Maggid Shir, I would have fired you." This is what the stipler said. How could he despair? A Talmud who was learning so diligently, learning new halachas every single day, they could literally apply on him the statement that anyone who learns halach every single day is guaranteed a place in the world to come. We say it at the end of Moses, so it's a Gemara Nida on Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Could the Rosh Yeshiva really consider this student someone who didn't see success in his learning? This lesson doesn't just apply to that one student. It applies to each and every one of us. The stipler said, look, Rabbi Yaakov, he's talking to Rabbi Galinsky, he said, you often speak in front of Bnei Torah. Many of them believe that success in learning is measured according to the admiration and esteem they enjoy in the yeshiva and according to the warmth and approval of the person giving the shiur, the teacher, the rabbi, Maggid Shir, what he displays towards them, and by the lightning quick questions or sharp witted answers, and by the depth of the learning or the broadness of their knowledge, their bikiyas. Tell them that they are making a mistake. Every single page of Gemara that they know, every Rashi that they understand, every Tosfos that they learn, that is success. Every little bit of Torah that a person learns, that is success. Says the stipler, if they knew this, they would be spared a tremendous amount of anguish, and they would rejoice and be happy. The truth is that the stipler's outlook is found in a story in a Gemara. The Gemara in Maseches Eruvin on Nun Daled Amud Beis relates that Rabbi Prida was rewarded because he taught a student 400 times the same exact idea. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz Zatzal points out that someone who hears the story is impressed with Rav Prida, who taught the same lesson 400 times. But Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, he was more impressed with the student. Such willpower, determination to achieve the goal, to learn the same thing 400 times in order to understand it. In light of this, Rav Chaim Kanievsky was once asked why the Talmud didn't receive the reward. Why was it the rabbi that received the reward from this Gemara? As we know from that Gemara, he says that from the student's perspective, what he did wasn't so remarkable. He was obligated to learn Torah. If he didn't understand the material unless he reviewed it 400 times, he was required to do so. That's why the reward went to the rabbi. There's another similar story. There's a young man who came to the Chafetz Chaim and he complained that he was learning for 5 years and he was just trying to master Gemara, but he didn't see any signs of the fruits of his labor, no signs of success. He was still able to he was still unable to even understand one page of Gemara with the commentaries properly. Yes, the Chafetz Chaim, is it worth it to learn? Chafetz Chaim responded, "My son, Hashem has not commanded us to be great scholars and geniuses." That's what he said. Rather, all he has told us is "Hagisa bo yomim v'layla," to learn Torah day and night, to strive to the best of our abilities. Our function is to labor in the study of Torah. We must apply ourselves with seriousness and the best that we could towards learning Torah. Whether or not we will develop into great scholars, it's irrelevant. We just have to learn. Not everyone is endowed with the intellectual capability to become a scholar. It requires a tremendous amount of work. If you have labored in the study of Torah, even if the results have not been such as you have hoped for, nevertheless you have done your duty. Furthermore, who is a Talmid Chacham? Not someone who has the ability to study and absorb what he studies. Rather, the Talmid Chacham the scholar is the individual who actively applies his energies towards learning Torah. You have shown by your interest in your learning that you possess this trait. Students who don't progress as rapidly or as well as they would like to in their studies are reminded that it's not expected of them to develop into halachic authorities, someone who's going to be a paisik necessarily, a big Talmid Chacham, a big Rosh Yeshiva. That's not what's demanded. What's demanded is the hagisa bo yoyim v'layla, amelus b'Torah, to toil when it comes to learning, to put a lot of labor and effort into it. Don't waste time away in unessential and unimportant activities. Someone will apply yourself. That's the key. And if you do so, your reward will be in proportion to the amount of labor that's put in and how difficult it was. Don't be discouraged about the extensive amount of learning to be absorbed before one comes proficient in Torah. As the Mishnah in Avos says, Lo alecha hamalacha ligmor. It's not the duty to finish all of the work. You don't have to finish everything. Just do whatever you could. A lifetime is it enough time to achieve mastery of the entire Torah as well. But one should not get discouraged from that. Even if it's difficult to absorb, retain the knowledge, don't get discouraged. The primary function of the individual is to apply himself to his learning with the intellectual capabilities that God has given us. Pretty clear answer over here. We just have to try our best. This I saw was quoted in the Sermons at the Torah Synagogue, pages 159 to 161. Tremendous idea. Rabbi Galinsky, in his Vigadat and Parshas Bechukosai, explains that for every hardship and degree of difficulty, the reward is increased 100-fold. It is better for a person to have one thing that he gained through suffering than 100 things that he received without working for it. That's a big line. That line is in the Avos Rabbi Nassan in Gimel Vav. One thing that's acquired through a great deal of effort is worth 100 times more than something one could gain with ease. The Alter of Kelm explains what this means. For every degree of suffering, a person gets 100 times the reward. If he's a little tired, he gets the reward of 100 hours of learning. If he's more tired, he's rewarded for 10,000 hours. Wow, that idea is powerful. 1 hour of learning could be worth 1,000,000 hours. If a person's even more tired, it could be worth 100 million hours, 10 million, 1,000,000,000,000. This is true for every hardship a person faces in learning and for every degree of suffering he encounters. So at the end of the day, the person was very busy. They didn't have time to learn. And he says, you know what? I'm going to set aside time to learn Torah. Even though I'm so tired, that is worth a tremendous amount. Pasuk says, in B'chukosai say lechu, if you follow my decrees, observe my commandments, perform them. Beginning of the opening pasuk in B'chukosai, Chav Vav Gimel. Rashi quotes the Torah's Kohanim, who explains that this is referring to Shetiu Amelim B'Torah, to toil when it comes to learning. Tali Oiros, on page 270, quotes the Gemara in Brachos. Gemara at the end of Brachos, other places as well, it's on Samach Gimel and Brachos. In Divrei Torah Miskayim Elam Yishem Mises Atzmala, the Torah only lasts in someone who kills himself over it. Meaning, the Torah will only lasts and get remembered by someone who diligently learns. Taz explains, Simon Zayin, the Torah won't last within people who are learning with many comforts. This is the explanation, one explanation of the Gemara in Nedarim on Pei Aleph. The text of the bracha is a lasik, the divrei Torah, to deal with Torah. Ran explains the Torah isn't just another subject. It has to be an esek, deal with it, put forth effort. Chaim Volozhin, in his introduction to the Sifra Disniusa, writes about his Rebbe, the Vilna Gaon. He explains that the Vilna Gaon didn't want to receive any of the deep Torah concepts, esoteric, philosophical, Kabbalistic, and mystical ideas from any angels. He didn't want to learn any Torah from angels, Malachim, even though he was offered it. He wanted to toil on his own. That's the Vilna Gaon. Because the Vilna Gaon understood what Amelus B'Torah does to a person, what it means to toil in Torah. The pasuk says, the children struggled within her. This is referring to Rivka in Bereshis. Chaf Beis. Rashi quotes the Midrash that tells us that when Rivka would walk past a shul, Yaakov would kick to get out, or a base Midrash, Yaakov would try to get out. And when she would pass a place of idolatry, of Avodah Zarah, Esav would try to kick to come out. The question arises, based on the Gemara Nida. Gemara Nida says on Daf Lamed, it makes sense, before the Gemara Nida, it makes sense that Esav wants to go out to worship the idolatry. Well, why did Yaakov want to go out? The Gemara Nida on Daf Lamed teaches us that the fetus gets taught the entire Torah by an angel when he's in the womb. Why would he want to leave? Also, he has food there. He gets fed there, and he doesn't need to waste time going to the restroom as well. Why would he want to leave? The answer is obvious based on what we just said regarding the Vilna Gaon. One answer is, this is quoted by the Kemotzi Shlal Rav on pages 213 to 214, and many Svarim bring this answer. Yaakov wanted to get out in order that he could be Amil B'Torah, that he could toil when it comes to learning. Not just learning, get it spoon-fed. This is another reason why the Malach hits us and we forget our learning. One explanation is because this type of learning that we're just spoon-fed, it's not as important as opposed to one is working on it, one's toiling on it. The Gemara in Brachos on Kaf Ches Amid Beis relates, Anu Amelim V'hem Amelim. We toil and they toil. We toil and we receive reward, and they toil and they don't. What's the explanation of that? People who aren't learning Torah, they toil and they get rewarded for their work that they do. They get a nice paycheck. There's several explanations to this. Chafetz Chaim, Ala Torah on pages 178 to 179, as well as the Otzer HaMashalim on pages 185 to 186, explains by means of an analogy. It's analogous to someone who was hired to fix clothing. Sew clothing. He worked very hard to do it, but he was unsuccessful. If he has to be paid, he would be considered foolish. Tailors only get paid when they complete the work. Their payment isn't based on the amount of effort, toil, and energy they put into their work. It's based on the result. One doesn't get rewarded for toil without result. Conversely, when it comes to learning, we are rewarded according to our effort that was exerted, even if we don't understand something clearly. As the Gemara in Gittin says, a person won't have half of the success with his learning unless he stumbles first. Gemara in Gittin on Mem Gimel Mad Aleph, Ein Adam Oimed Al Divrei Torah In Ki Nichshel Tchila. Person has to get the wrong explanation first. He'll still get reward. Even if the work/learning is incomplete, reward will still nevertheless be granted. This is the explanation of we toil and receive reward. They toil and don't. We get rewarded based on the toiling that we do, the exertion, the effort, the energy, even if it's incomplete and we didn't fully grasp and comprehend the learning properly. The reward is dependent upon effort, not results. Similarly, The Ksav Sofer actually offers a different explanation over here. This is in the Shilos and Chuvas Ksav Sofer and Orach Chaim Simin Chof in Dibur HaMaskal V'Hine. Some rigorously toil in order to be successful, but profit only minimally. There's a lot of jobs out there. Not everyone has a lot of money. A lot of people try. Only some people have success. Luck plays a very important role in the easiness of one's job and the profit. Conversely, regarding learning, a person's understanding of the Torah is based on one thing, toil. Not one thing, but one primary factor. If someone toils, we also said before, Avos Torah, he has to love the Torah, a lot of things. But the main ingredient is toiling in Torah. Someone who toils will have success and vice versa. There are essentially no other external factors that will determine one's success and reward from learning. This is the main ingredient right over here. In Birchas Torah, he says, we say, Lasik b'divrei Torah, like we just says. Why? We should be involved with learning Torah. Bach says, in accordance to the amount of that one is involved with learning, will be his reward. As we saw in the pasuk in Bechukosai as well, Bechukosai Selechu. That's the Bach over here. That's the idea. It's all about the toil. That's what it's about. The Torah's Kohanim that we said above. The Gemara Megillah says, on Davav Beis, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Im Yomer L'cha Adam, if a person says, Yagati v'lo matzasi al tamen, person says, I toiled and I didn't find success in my learning, don't believe him. If a person says, Lo Yagati u'matzasi al tamen, a person says, I didn't toil and I found success in my learning, don't believe him. However, if a person says, Yagati u'matzasi tamen, person says, I found success, I toiled in my learning and I found success, believe him. Says the Gemara, Hani minil v'divrei Torah. This is talking about when it comes to learning Torah. Aval masa matan siatum min hashmaya. When it comes to parnasa, when it comes to making money, it all depends on in heaven and what they do. The reason is we could only have success if we toil. What's the difference between toiling in Torah and toiling by working to try to make money? The Ksav Sofer explains this is based on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Lefum Sara Agra. According to the pain, the exertion, the difficulty we put in to learning Torah or performing a mitzvah, that will be our reward. It depends on the amount of effort we put in. Hashem wants us to toil and made learning hard. This was done in order that we will get more reward. Hashem is doing us a big favor. The more toil, the more reward. Ben Ish Chai, in his Ben Yohyada, in Brachos, Kaf Chesamet Beis, offers a different answer to why it says that we toil and get reward, they toil and don't get reward. The toil itself is the reward. When we get to the level that we love the toil that we exert in order to understand what we're learning properly, we'll also realize that the toil itself, that is the reward. Incredible. With this, we can understand the Gemara in Brachos that says Agra, Amar, that says Agra, Tishmaisa Svar, that the reward for learning is the logic. It's the logic. In other words, the effort that we put in to reaching the proper halachic conclusion, that is the reward. He writes in his Ben Ish Chai, that the role of a righteous person is analogous to someone who went to the doctor. The doctor instructed that he needed to exercise his body in order that he would perspire, that he'll sweat. The patient saw hired workers who were carrying heavy loads from one place to another. He joined them and began willingly carrying these loads, even though he wasn't receiving payment like the other workers. He carried it because that was the doctor's orders. He needed to sweat. At night, all of the workers received their wages from the employer. His wages were the toil itself. In order that the exertion would cause perspiration, which would subsequently cure him, so too regarding the righteous people. The toil itself is the reward. The exertion is the cure to sickness. The toiling heals. Those who aren't toiling properly will not be properly cured. See on RabbiBlan.com, Parshas Kisisa in 2016, which luchos were better, first and second, and why, and how this ties in. The Stipler, in the Chayei Olam, Chelik Beis, Parak Yud Beis, on pages 267 to 269, discusses the importance of toiling. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, on Gimel Med Aleph, states Eina Kadosh Baruch Hu ba Vitrunya im Yosef. Hashem doesn't come with claims about his creations, meaning Hashem doesn't expect us to do that which is beyond our capabilities. See the on Sefer Yehoshua on the playlist, incredible inspiration for more details about that. Someone who has difficulties learning but exerts himself is even more loved than someone who is much better at learning who doesn't exert himself. This is tremendous insight for people who have a harder time grasping and understanding. Your reward will be more. The Gemara says in Brachos on Hey Beis as well as the end of Menachos Kofyod, whether a person does a lot or a little, as long as his intent is towards heaven. This applies to learning, this applies to a lot of things. You have to have the right intent. Do the most you could, do the best you could. Simple explanation of this Gemara is whether you bring a lot of korbanos or a little, as long as you're doing it for the sake of heaven, but it applies to learning as well. Someone who has difficulties learning is even better than someone who is sharper, naturally smarter, and gifted. The reason for this is, since it was easier for the smart person, he will therefore get more enjoyment for his learning. He will automatically want to continue learning more. So it's easier for him. Conversely, the unintellectual individual had greater difficulty learning. The person who isn't as smart, it's much harder for him. It's more challenging. It's less enjoyable. It's as if he's carrying a heavier load, so to say. Therefore, applying the previously mentioned Mishnah, according to the exertion will be the reward. It's logical to say that his reward will be greater and he will be loved more by Hashem. In the next world, the smart person won't necessarily merit completeness in Torah. Someone who toils will merit the completeness in Torah. The Sefer Chasidim in Siman 1164 explains that someone who toils according to his ability, even if he wasn't able to understand everything, will nevertheless merit that in the next world he will understand everything. But the opposite is also correct. Someone who didn't toil according to his abilities that he was able to do, even though he's still considered a great learner, he will nevertheless not know the truth of the Torah in the next world. The Gemara in Psachim on Nunam and Aleph states, Olam hafach ra'isi. Someone went up to the next world. He said, I saw a backwards world. El yoinim lamata v'tachtoin lamala. Amar lo b'ni oilam boru ra'isa. He said, I saw the opposite world. All the big shots, the entrepreneurs, the famous people, they're all considered nothing in the next world. If they are ignoramuses in this world who didn't give charity, help society, or they have a low, then, right, they're going to have a low status in the next world. However, the Talmidei Chacham and the Torah scholars, they're going to have a very high status in the next world. Someone who has difficulty learning, but nevertheless strives and exerts great effort towards his learning, will merit a heavenly assistance, siyata d'shmaya. He can reach a level which is even above nature. There's a story of a student who came to the Chassam Sofer. At the age of 17, he wanted to learn. He had a desire, he yearned to learn. The other students, they laughed at him because he was so young and he never learned properly before. The Chassam Sofer immediately rebuked all of them and said, Kol haroitze l'lilmoid yavo v'yilmod. Kol mi sheroitze, right? V'yitol yavo v'yitol. Anyone who wants to come and learn, let him learn. Anyone's allowed to learn Torah. Take a look at Brachos, Kaf Ches Amid Aleph, Rabbeinu Yoin in the first mission of Pirkei Avos, the Gemara in Yuma, Ayin Beis and Beis, the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Yimach Halacha Aleph. Anyone can learn Torah. Anyone who wants to. He instructed them, take turns teaching him. They were each obligated to rotate and allocate time to teach him. The problem was that this youngster also had difficulty understanding and remembering. Siyavos Perek, the 4 types of learners. They would have to constantly reteach and repeat the information to him. Take a look at Eruvin that we just discussed about the 400 times. We just discussed that with Rabbi Pri, the same exact idea. He had a tremendous desire to learn. He diligently learned and had heavenly assistance. Take a look at the Gemara in Shabbos, Kuf Dalet Amud Aleph, Tais was there. He subsequently became a true God-fearing Jew and a Talmid Chacham. Eventually, he was appointed Rav of the city of Mansdorf in Yerushalayim. He is quoted many times throughout the Shilas and Shuvas Chasam Sofer. Can you imagine? If this individual was able to do it, then Kal v'chomer, surely we could do it as well. The unfortunate reality and reason why some people don't reach their potential is because they give up. The reason why they don't understand and grasp their learning properly is because they give up too early. We must never give up. Stipler writes in his Orchos Yosher in Siman Chavtes, pages 90 to 91, that the Torah not see also all the recordings on the Orchos Yosher on the Musar section on rabbiblon.com. He writes that Torah knowledge will not come easily and quickly. Someone who wants to be a true Talmid Chacham, a true scholar, has to have diligence and patience. And we discussed this in the past, in the Incredible Inspiration. In that one, there is no such concept as an instant Talmid Chacham. Instant coffee is different, okay? It's known that the smartest people in yeshiva won't necessarily become the greatest. It's the ones who have the most diligence. They're going to be the ones who are more likely to become great and most successful. What's the difference between the smart one and the diligent one? Someone who isn't as smart needs to spend more time learning. However, eventually he's going to understand what the smart person understands. He's going to understand what he learned. At the end of the day, they're going to possess the same knowledge. However, the diligent person, the masmid, he wants to continue to learn more and more because he has a great desire to learn. The smart one, he's going to end up stopping learning seriously. That's the difference between the two. Just to say one last point, there's a lot of people now, Baruch Hashem, that are davening 3 times a day. And you see the amount of time that goes into the davening. It's a beautiful thing. But what about the amount of time, honest time, that people are spending every single day, setting aside time to learn and learn with effort and toil? We see with our own eyes how capable people are, how much money they're able to make, how much time they're able to do other activities, and how much time they allocate to have other activities. The time should be minimally equally distributed to learning. Free time, how much time is a person just wasting time? How much is he learning? Those are the questions that we're going to have to answer when we go up at the end of our life. Toiling in Torah, how much do we really put in? How much effort do we put in? That's what it's about. How much time do we allocate and how much effort do we allocate? Those are the questions that we're going to have to answer.